no matter what you read, hear, or see in the coming weeks, hell, maybe in the previous week or so, I am going to rebuff those assertions. That assertion being that Iran has violated the JCPOA. When you look through my media today, be it on YouTube or be it just through news, that seems to be the thing that's coming up. I will make the case that Iran has not, N-O-T, capital N-O-T, violated the JCPOA. And yes, I did this video once before. Yes, I hated that video. So yes, this is Groundhog's Day. I'm doing this video again. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you enjoyed this content, you find yourself coming back here often, please consider supporting this content through PayPal or Patreon. Even $1 helps. They demonetize these videos, and just putting Iran in a title is probably enough to get this video demonetized. Yes, I did this video once before. I hated that video, and I even missed what I was supposed to kind of make my main point. My basic point is this. Iran has not violated the JCPOA. And going further to my main point, I want to talk about the underlying politics that's taken place between Iran and the United States, and even between the European Union, who, though weak, though docile, though a subordinate member in regards to this kind of coalition with the United States, are still a party to this treaty. And as such, they still have to say so in this. If we're being honest, if we're being brutally honest, and we're not looking at this from the standpoint of parties or anything else, we can at least say that the U.S. is the aggressor in this conflict. It was Trump that pulled out of the JCPOA. The European countries stood aside, holding and wringing their hands when he did so, but it was Trump that pulled out of the JCPOA. And you would have thought that Europe would have, screamed all high hell when Trump did so, but they complained, they moaned, but ultimately, they didn't say much. Iran stayed in this deal. But let's be very clear. The day that Trump pulled out of that deal, it was equivalent to the United States pulling out a revolver and shooting that deal in the face. That deal was done. It didn't matter that the European countries were trying to set up some kind of payment scheme in order to get companies, compensation. This was tiny and small to get around the kind of sanctions. They couldn't prevent and they couldn't protect Iran from the sanctions. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Despite the United States being one nation, they could not protect Iran from the sanctions. And so regardless of what the tenor of the governments were, the private entities, the private companies that were a part of those nations pulled out. They didn't want to lose business with the U.S., so they pulled out. And Iran took the brunt of the sanctions. Sanctions kill. And they took those sanctions for a year, and they didn't say squat. They complained. They said something to the European allies. You guys need to do something. But ultimately, Europe bitched and moaned, but didn't really do anything. A year after that, Rouhani gave this address. And what Rouhani is saying here is saying, look, we kept with the commitments for a year. We kept with the commitments for a year. The U.S. pulled out. We kept with the commitments for a year. And you have not protected or shielded us from the sanctions that the United States have put on us. You are violating the terms of the agreement. And yet we're staying with those terms. So we are no longer just going to sit idly by and be the only participants agreed to the terms. We are pulling back on some of the agreements. So one of those had to do with the 3.67 enrichment rate. Now let's be very clear. It takes 90% to have a nuclear weapon, and we're talking about 3.67%. They said, well, look, we're pulling back on this. We can enrich to whatever we want, but we're pulling back on this. The second thing had to do with the amount of enriched uranium they had. They said, we are also pulling back on that commitment. We put whatever we want. If you are not attending to an agreement, why should we attend to an agreement? I don't understand how that is not a logical and fair argument. But let's be very clear. This has nothing to do with fairness. This is about domination. Israel has nuclear weapons. Nobody says squat about it because they're our allies. Saudi Arabia are our allies. Iran is not. In which case, Trump can put pressure on Iran in this way. And these two, Saudi Arabia, and Israel is perfectly willing to fight to the last dead American, the last dollar spent. This is about domination. This is nothing to do about fairness. That's the first point. We're not moral arbiters. That's the second point that needs to be understood. Oftentimes, this stuff takes the perspective of the American perspective, but our perspective is not the moral or just the right perspective by virtue of it being us. Iran has the right to enrich their uranium like any other country has the right to enrich their uranium. And it is a hard pill to swallow that they are the biggest threat in the region of the world when we are the ones that have ratcheted up tensions from the day Donald Trump pulled out of that agreement. Just want that to be clear, first and foremost. Look, the point of this is to get Europe off of its ass to do something. The point of this is to get Europe to be on their side and saying that the United States needs to relieve these sanctions. That's the point of it. It's to get pressure. Because up to this point, it doesn't seem like anybody else cares to do anything. And while Iran sits there attending to these agreements that nobody else seems to care about, their situation gets worse. They're trying to precipitate a change, and they're trying to precipitate Europe getting involved in a heavier way because Europe does not want this to go south. And this is kind of what I want to get into the underlying politics of this. Now, from the perspective of Iran, they have not pulled out the agreement. Meaning there are 2 points to understand here. One, that on the day that Trump pulled out the agreement, that deal was shot in the face because the other countries of the world could not shield Iran from the repercussions of the sanctions that the United States was implementing. Iran, however, is taking the perspective that, look, we stood by this for a year. There is a provision within the context of the JCPOA that allows us to suspend certain elements when other parties are not attending to their agreements. That's their argument. Their argument is we haven't left the agreement, you have. And that Europe needs to back us up on this. That we are pulling back from some of these elements because the United States has not been a fair arbiter in this deal. And so why should we attend to a deal that the United States is not attending to and that the rest of Europe cannot protect us from the United States in this context? How is that not right? How is that not right? Their argument is this. Under the context of the deal, we can pull back on certain provisions. This is their foreign minister, Javad Zarif. Today, Iran is taking its second round of remedial steps under paragraph 36 under the JCPOA. Again, is argued within the context of the JCPOA. We reserve the right to continue to exercise legal remedies within the JCPOA to protect our interests in the face of U.S. economic terrorism. That's literally what it is. All such steps are reversible only through E3 compliance. Having failed to implement their obligations under the JCPOA including after the U.S. withdrawal, EU E3 should at a minimum politically support Iran's remedial measure under paragraph 36 included at the IAEA. E3 has no pretext to avoid firm political stance to preserve the JCPOA and counter U.S. unilateralism. The United States, by itself, decided to pull out of this agreement. Iran is making the point, look, all of us, together, made this agreement. You were supposed to back up the parties of the agreement based on fairness, not based on just who you liked the most. When the U.S. pulled out of the deal, we stayed by the deal. Looks like you would support us in saying that they pulled out of the deal. We're taking remedial steps in order to address the fact that they pulled out of the deal. It's kind of tit for tat, just game theory. Europe should back us. That's their point. Europe was waving their fist at Iran when Iran said we're going to take remedial steps to pull out of various elements of it because the U.S. is not backing us. But why should you wave your fist at Iran? It was the U.S. that pulled out of this deal. This is the kind of point I made. The U.S. is the one that shot the deal in the face, not Iran. Why wouldn't Iran have every right to pull out of the deal in its entirety when the U.S. is the one that killed the deal? But they're still arguing within the context of the deal. Iran is not looking for a provocation. Their argument is a legalistic one. It's a technicality one, and it's one that I like because it's making this point of, look, we are still trying to keep this deal on life support. Europe You said all of the tenets of the deal are being upheld. You said we were living up to our obligations. Support us in this. And Europe should. Europe should. If Europe cares about the JCPOA, then it should protect Iran in this. It should support Iran in this. And I would even go so far as to say it should support Iran in its measures in which they are breaching elements of the deal. They should be supported. It was the U.S. that has provoked all of this. Any fair reading of this, any honest reading of this, looks at this and says it's the U.S. that has provoked all of this. And again, in legalistic terms, if Javad is right, and I give him the benefit of the doubt because these are legal texts, and legal texts are always fudgeable, and so it depends on the way that you read it. And by the way, the U.S. could read this in a way where it's saying it's suspending obligations because Iran is not meeting its deals and so forth. That works both ways. The catch with this is the European powers have said that Iran was meeting its obligations under the deal. It was us. Iran is still speaking in terms of the deal. Donald Trump is not. If Europe is going to throw a hissy fit, the hissy fit needs to be thrown at Donald Trump, not at Iran. You should back Iran in pulling out of elements of this deal, especially since the U.S. has pulled out of it in its entirety. So I just wanted to point this out, and I didn't want to take a huge amount of time to do it, so good. I ran through this pretty quickly. Oh, politics. There are underlying politics that are taking place in regards to this, and of course there are underlying politics that are taking place. Rouhani pulling out of this is putting pressure on Europe. Now, there are certain things that both parties know that is driving how they're going about the politics. And let's talk about this from the standpoint of Iran. One, the United States will be damaged with a war. Meaning Iran and the United States knows that it will be damaged by the war. It was damaged with the war with Iraq. And that war killed, over 1 million Iraqis, 4,000 Americans, cost $7 trillion. Iran is 3 times the size with a more sophisticated military. It would be more damaging to this country. We know it, meaning the public knows it. Iran also knows that the American public knows it, and it also knows that Trump knows it. The second point, the EU. The chaos that is taking place within the context of the European Union right now with these Eurosceptic parties and this pulling apart, even like the Brexit parties and so forth, have a lot to do with the foreign policy of the United States and Europe. The destruction of Iraq, the destruction of Libya, the smashing of Afghanistan and Syria, the giving weapons to terrorists. Those policies have allowed a flood of refugees to flood into Europe. That flood of refugees into Europe and the various European countries have caused a backlash in which people have freaked out and have started voting in people who are Eurosceptics. They want control of their borders. They want control of their borders because they want to be able to say no to migrants coming into the country. Again, that was a result of foreign policy of the United States and Europe. The Europeans know that. Meaning, the Europeans are not interested in a war. Part of the reason that the Europeans were so gung-ho about this deal was because they understood that it was an end around of preventing a war. And now you have the situation where Trump, Bolton, and Pompeo are ratcheting up tensions where they know can easily spill over into something that is a larger conflict and a large war. Where Europe, many of these guys are full on drunk the Kool-Aid that the European project is the greatest thing on the planet, hate that. They don't want a flood of refugees. They understood the impact that the last flood of refugees had in destabilizing Europe. The last thing they want is more right-wing parties getting into office based on the refugee issue and creating more of an immigration crisis. They are not interested in a war in the sense of Iran. They are against Trump, Pompeo, and Bolton on this notion of war with Iran. Now the question becomes whether they are able to get over their obsequiousness to U.S. policy and actually back Iran on something when Iran is right. And we don't know. Are they willing to screw over their populations for the United States? We don't know. But Iran knows that EU is not looking for this. And the last point, they know Trump doesn't want a war. They know Donald Trump does not want a war. Fact of the matter is, there's been friction between Trump, Pompeo and Trump and Bolton, mainly between Trump and Bolton, where there are talks on whether or not Bolton is even going to make it out of this particular term, let alone the next term. Some of that has come with this notion of Iran and the policy with Iran, where Trump feels that Bolton is getting him closer and closer into a war, which is something that he doesn't want. And it's something that Iran knows that Trump doesn't want. It's something that, for the most part, the public knows that Trump doesn't want. So you can squeeze Iran all that you want. At the end of the day, they know that Trump doesn't want a war. They also know that there's a time limit on what Trump can do. Meaning Trump is going to be running for presidency. And is it Trump, the guy running for presidency, also going to be trying to overthrow a government? Trump has an expiration date. Not to mention, Trump's brand is that I'm the guy that's not going to get you into wars. There's several factors that Iran and the people involved in the politics of this kind of know on somewhat of a low level. But those politics drive the behavior of what's taking place now on somewhat of a more experiential level. The fact of the matter is, Trump is not going to have the ability to get Iran to the table for talks without going back to the JCPOA. At this point, at some point, he has to realize that, and I suspect that him saying, I'm willing to talk without preconditions, is somewhat of a testament to that. The problem is, talking without preconditions is to go back to the JCPOA and start from there. Iran has no leeway to give you in this case because you've essentially embarrassed the moderates of the party that were willing to give you a chance with that deal in the first place. That's what's taking place now. A boat has been seized off the coast of Spain. Britain is calling it their territory. Britain is the one that seized the boat at the behest of America. Spain is pissed off because Spain is looking at it as they are trespassing on their territory, and they're already somewhat sketchy on this notion of Britain having access to the Strait of Gibraltar. So the Iran is now saying, because of this, we have just cause now to attack one of your ships. This is heating up, and we have no idea where this goes. I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.